right. So give me 1 second. We're going to try something out. Still looks decent, right? Without the lights on. Yeah. Cool, cool, cool. We're going to try this out for today. We're going to keep the lights off. I've done a couple going both ways, but yeah, we're going to see how it goes. Keeping the lights off and seeing if that actually does better for the lighting or not. But anyways, we're going to be getting into the show just momentarily. So as you tune in, just know I appreciate you. Thanks for being here. If you have tuned into the show before, you know the deal. You know what we're here for. You know why we are doing this each and every week. Hello, hello, hello. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you tuning into the show today. The goal of the show, as always, is to help athletes reach new levels of themselves in sport, to help athletes become better versions of themselves that can succeed at higher and higher levels in sport and make their dreams for their athletic careers come true. Now, what we talk about on the show, we talk about a wide variety of topics. We go into mindset work. We go into tactical things that you can take into your training and into the approach to your week when it comes to training as an athlete. And one of the most important things that we get into is just making sure that as an athlete, you're keeping an open mind, you're staying strong, you're understanding that there's no one right answer to anything that we do here in the world of elite performance sport. So again, we'll get into the show in about 30 seconds. I appreciate you tuning in as you do. But before we actually get started on the podcast, if you haven't tuned in before, I would greatly appreciate that you take a moment, go subscribe to the show wherever it is you listen, and make sure that you're sharing the show over with somebody who needs to hear the message, sharing it with somebody who is going to benefit from it. So let's get into the show. Today, we're talking about the number one trait of unsuccessful athletes. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's go in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the number one show for athletes with the intention of becoming better versions of themselves and building their dream careers in sport. Wow, I butchered that intro, but we're going to keep rolling with it. So, as I mentioned, we are all about helping athletes improve on this podcast within this company. That is our number one goal. That is what we are here to do. And so today we're going to be talking about the number one trait of unsuccessful athletes when it comes to training for sport. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because there is so much information out there about how to succeed. There's so much information out there about what you need to do to actually see success in your athletic career that I think something that gets glossed over is the things to watch out for that might be ruining the success in your athletic career. And something that I've come to realize that is that humans tend to look for the negative. We tend to go for, negative news. We tend to go for all of these things that maybe aren't in our best interest. So in a few of these shows, what I want to do is start to speak to that negative side of the equation, not in giving you advice on doing things improperly, but simply to trigger something in your mind and help you realize that you have work to do, help you realize that you have improvements you still need to make. So that's why today we are going to be talking about the number one trait of unsuccessful athletes, the number one thing you need to watch out for in yourself or those around you that is going to prevent you from being successful in your athletic career. So the number one trait that I see in unsuccessful athletes, or that creates unsuccessful athletes, is blaming outside circumstances for their situation. Now, this doesn't have to be specifically around the sport either. So what I mean when I say that, number one, the most common thing I see is making excuses. There are two types of athletes in the world. One that will make excuse, one that will find a way to get shit done. Now, what I mean when I say that is I'll give a plain example from day to day at the gym. So for those of you who don't know, I own a gym here in Calgary, Alberta. And so one of the most common examples I see of this is I will have athletes that message me and say, I can't make it to my training session today. See you next week. That happens every once in a while. I get it. Things come up. And, when things come up, sometimes there's nothing you can do about that. And so you send in, you say, I can't make it to my training session. See you at the next one. I have others, however, that will say, hey, I can't make it to my training session at 4:00 on Friday. So is there any way that we can set up a time on Wednesday so that I can make sure that I still get my session in and I'm not missing out? Now, of those two examples, which do you think is going to be more successful in their career? Of those two examples, which do you think is going to be more successful in your career? It's easy. The one who is finding a way to get shit done is always going to beat out the one who's making the excuse, the one who's finding the reason not to do the work. It's simple. Exactly. Number two, the one who's finding the way to get shit done is going to beat the other one out every single time. And so, in a simple scenario like that, what I want you to do is look back at your past week. Look back at all the interactions you've had. Look back at, what you've done training wise. Look back at your past week and ask yourself, are there any moments where I used an excuse instead of finding a way to get the shit done that I knew needed to get done? And this can be outside of just training as well. Like I said, this is life in general. These are traits you want to develop in yourself as a person, rather traits you don't want to develop in yourself as a person. Because I understand it. Still to this day, I talk about this regularly. And still to this day, there are definitely times where my first instinct is to go for the excuse. My first instinct is to go for, well, I can't do that because of insert reason here. But the more and more and more that you can catch yourself when you're in that position, the more you can catch yourself and say, I'm making an excuse right now and I need to change the way I'm talking, or I need to change the way I'm thinking, the more and more success you are going to see at whatever it is you do. So I want you to ask yourself, when in the last week have I used an excuse when I should have found a way? And if you're here right now, drop it in the comments. Tell me. I know that, sometimes it's uncomfortable to face that, but when have you used an excuse instead of finding a way? And so I'll give you guys an example of the getting shit done versus finding an excuse. On Tuesday, usually that's the day where I get client programming done. Everything that I need to get done client program wise gets done Tuesday. That keeps it organized in my schedule. That makes sure that everything is getting looked at, everything is getting done. And clients are never going without programs, because obviously as a strength and conditioning coach, if clients are going without programs, that is a pretty bad thing to have happen. So Tuesday this week, I had about 11 different things pop up in my schedule that needed immediate attention, and I wasn't able to get all the programming done. So instead of sitting there and saying, well, shit, I guess programming's not going to get done this week, I looked at the rest of my week. I figured out the time that I would be able to move a couple of things around, sit down, write the programs that I needed to write, and then shift the other activities that I had in order to make sure that I wasn't sacrificing from anywhere else, but I was still getting all the shit done that I needed to get done. Okay, does that make sense? So again, it doesn't have to be complicated. All I did was shift around my Wednesday and my Thursday to make sure that the programming that needed to get done got done, but I also didn't sacrifice any of the work that I had to do on either of those days. So are you the kind of person who makes the excuse and lets a task slide, or are you the kind of person who finds a way to get shit done? Now, one of the excuses that I find happens the most, wow, I really can't find my words today, but one of the excuses that I find happens the most when it comes to athletes is not having the money to train or not having the time to train. With both of these, I understand these are very real things. If you're looking at your budget right now and you don't have extra money, I sympathize with that. I get it. I've been there. But if you have high-level goals for your sport, if you have high-level goals for your career, if you have high-level goals for who you want to become, then instead of sitting and saying, I don't have the money to invest in this thing that I know I need to invest in, I know training is going to help me, but I don't have the money to invest in it, you need to find a way. And I know you're probably sitting here saying, well, I work and I have bills and I have this and I have that, so, I can't find a way. And I understand, again, at first thought, why you feel like you can't find a way. But if you can look truly at how you spend your money right now, and if you can look truly at how you spend your money right now, you can truly look and you can audit how your money is being spent. Ask yourself where your money is being wasted. Are you going out for drinks after work a couple nights a week? How much are you spending while you're there? Are you driving a fancier looking car than you need to drive? Are you living in a bigger house than you really need? Where is your money going? And are you able to fix it? Because again, if you're not willing to make those sacrifices, you're not willing to make those sacrifices. That's fine. But don't have those situations come up where you feel like you don't have the money to invest in something that you say is really important, where your money is actually going to all these other things. So it's not about not having the money. It's about not prioritizing where the money's being put. Does that make sense? So I feel like I butchered how I was saying that a little bit, but the main idea of that point is 9 times out of 10, and yes, I get that there are extreme cases, but 9 times out of 10, when people say, I don't have the money, it's not that they actually do not have the money to invest in these things that they know they need to invest in. It's that the money is being prioritized in other places. The money is being put in other places. They're going on vacations. They're buying a nicer car. They're buying nicer clothes. They're going out for drinks on the weekends. They're eating out every morning instead of making breakfast at home. They're buying coffee every day instead of making coffee at home. All of these little things add up. And if you are truly telling me that you want to reach the top in your sport, you are truly telling me you want to make a living at your sport, you want to, reach these high level goals for your athletic career, and you are doing any of these things, eating out every day, buying coffee every day, buying yourself a nicer car instead of something that'll just get you from point A to point B, living in a nicer house, all of these things, as harsh as it might sound to say, all of these things are taking away from the investment you need to make to reach the next level in your career. That's it. So that's the number one thing, is finding the time and finding the money. And with the time, it's the same thing. I won't go into too much detail on that because it should be pretty self-explanatory. But all the time, I have athletes tell me, I don't have time to add anything else into my week. Yeah, it'd be great to do all this extra work, but I don't have time. I work and I train. So what else? There's no way I can do it. If you really sit down and look at how you spend your time during the week, you really sit down and you audit where your time is being spent. Is it that you don't have the time? Or is it that you're spending that extra hour watching TV at night? Is it that you're spending 30 minutes a couple times a day scrolling on your phone? Is it that you're going to bed too late, getting up too late? Like, the time is there. Every single person has the same 24 hours. So why is it that you don't have the time, but all these other people do? I mean, it's like, it doesn't get much simpler than that. Why is it that you don't have the time, but all these other people do? We all have the same 24 hours. The hell are you doing with it? So the next thing, actually, before I get into the next thing that I've got here, I got a question that came in and I want to address that because it is a very, very important one. And the question is there an easy fix to stop making excuses, and how do you recognize this mistake? So the one way that I would really say to go about this, and the one way that's really helped me, is understand, and I'm going to dig into this more through the rest of the episode as well, but understand that if you can keep the mentality that every single thing that happens to you, good or bad, is your fault, that is an eye-opening way to live life. Even when things aren't, instead of looking and focusing on the things that are out of your power or out of your control, if you focus on the things you can actually control or you can actually change, that is an eye-opening way to live life. So, the example that I gave earlier in the show about, all of these things that popped up on Tuesday that made me not able to get the work I usually do on Tuesdays done, instead of being like, well, I couldn't get the work done because all this stuff popped up. Now I look at it, I go, okay, what can I control? What can I change? Well, what I can change is I can change up the rest of my schedule during my week to make sure that I'm incorporating this work that I know needs to get done and I'm not missing out anywhere else, right? So taking accountability, taking responsibility, understanding that it's up to me to get the stuff done and finding the way to do it instead of just blaming the outside circumstances, saying, well, I had stuff come up today, so I couldn't do it. Figuring out when I can do it, figuring out how I can do it, and making sure that it gets done. Does that make sense? So every time you feel like you're saying something, oh, I couldn't because, the chances are you're making an excuse and you need to shift I couldn't because to how can I? That makes sense? Let me know if you're still here. Let me know if that makes sense. But we're going to move on to the next thing. Now, the next big thing that I see athletes do when it comes to blaming their outside circumstance, when it comes to, blaming their outside circumstance for their lack of success, one of the biggest things that I see athletes do is they use reasons why they're not further along. So they use reasons why they're not further along. Like one common thing I hear in Calgary is I've heard a lot of athletes tell me, well, I'm not further in my career because Calgary's not a fight city. Calgary's not, a city for fighters. Well, first of all, that's just not true because there's a lot of fighters coming up out of Calgary. But second of all, if you really feel like the reason that you're not further in your career is because you live in Calgary, move. Right? So instead of sitting around and saying, because of this reason, I'm not further in my career, because of this reason, I'm struggling here, figure it out. You're a human being. You have the ability to make the changes you need to see the success you want to see in your career. It's not that hard. Figure it out. Move. Or understand that you're in Calgary right now, and instead of sitting around saying, well, it's not a fight city, so I can't get further because I'm in Calgary, do what you can. Get as far as you can. Use the resources that are at your disposal. It's like, I don't know what else to say. It's easy. Easy is the wrong word. It's simple, but it's not easy. But the whole idea is that whatever situation you are faced with, there's something you can do to improve it. One huge one I'm going to touch on is the pandemic. Now, this was a worldwide event, and I'm not getting into how people feel about it, one way or the other. If you think it was fake or you think it was the worst thing in the world, that is not what the point of this talk is. But I spoke to a ton of fighters during the pandemic that told me it's impossible to get fights right now because of the pandemic. So as an example, I am not a fight promoter. I am not an agent. That is not what I do. I had athletes tell me that it was impossible to find fights because of the pandemic, and I found 3 different athletes of mine fights in about 30 minutes. I got on Instagram and I DM'd a couple of promoters that had shows coming up and said, hey, I've got guys that are looking for fights. Are you interested? And he got back to me and said, yeah. And there we go. I had 3 guys that had fights in about 30 minutes of work. And that's not even what I do. So again, instead of sitting and saying, oh, it's really hard right now because the pandemic's going on, if you sit and say, man, it's really hard right now because the pandemic's going on, but how can I figure it out? There's going to be a way. Even if you don't know of shows coming up, start Googling promoters' names. When you find one, message them. The worst thing that happens is they say, no, we don't have a show coming up right now. Or no, we're not interested right now. The best thing that happens is you get the opportunity you're looking for. It's the same thing if you don't have a team right now. Instead of sitting around and saying, I don't have a team right now, get online and start sending messages to coaches in your area, out of your area, wherever it is. Whatever your situation is that you think is the reason you are not further along in your career is not the reason you're not further along in your career. The reason you are not further along in your career right now is because of you. And I know that's going to hurt some people to hear, but it's because of you. And I'm not saying that to be a dick. I'm saying that because we live in the greatest time in the world to be alive. We live in a time where you can get on your computer or on your phone and get in contact with literally anybody. So if you're sitting here saying, well, I'm not further along because I don't have a team right now, get on Google and search. MMA teams in my area, boxing teams in my area, boxing gyms in my area, MMA gyms in my area, MMA coaches in my area, boxing coaches in my area. Whatever the sport is, whatever team you're looking for, search it up on Google. If you don't find anything right away, search it up for the next town over, the next town over, the next town over. Keep moving back until you can find one. And if the closest one you can find is hours away, then you got to ask yourself, how serious are you about your goal? How serious are you about wanting to reach that level? How serious are you about wanting to build the career you say you want to build? Because if you're serious and there's literally no resources in your city, you can move. It's not going to be easy, but you can. So how serious are you? So I feel like I've gone on a tangent here because this is something that honestly truly pisses me off at times. But for those that are here, I appreciate you taking the time to tune in. But what I really want to get across with this episode, what I really want to get across to you, and really the overarching point of this whole episode of the number one trait of unsuccessful athletes is blaming outside circumstances for their situation. The moment you can understand that you are fully in control of your life, the better your life's going to be. I'll say that one more time. The moment you can understand that you are truly in control of your life, the better your life is going to be. If you have a situation right now that is causing you struggle, if you have a situation right now that is stopping you from being able to train, or you're financially tight because of this, that, or the other thing that's come up, I get it. I get that hearing this is hard, but if you can ask yourself, what can I do here? How can I make more money? How can I get out of this tight spot? What can I control? You're going to find something. It might take some time. It might take some work. It might not be easy. But instead of sitting back and saying, I can't do anything about it and it's not my fault, finding that one thing you can change, finding that one thing you can control, finding that one thing you can actually do is going to help make progress. It's going to help push you forward. But sitting around and complaining about these things that are outside of your control is doing nothing for you. So if you want to be a successful athlete, then why are you sitting around not taking action? Why are you sitting around complaining that you don't have the money, or complaining that you don't have the time, or complaining that you live in the wrong area, or complaining that you don't have a team, when you can take very, very simple action in order to correct that situation? So that is it. That is all. I hope this triggered some of you. I hope you all got some value out of it. If you have tuned into the show before and you tuned into the episode today and you got some value from it, I would greatly appreciate a review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, as well as I would appreciate a follow on social media. All of the information on how you can do that will be in the show notes when the podcast is dropped. In the meantime, the biggest ask I have of all of you is that if you got value from the show and you have stayed on until this point, please do me a huge favor. Share the show with a teammate, with a friend, with somebody who needs to hear this message. This just might be the thing that turns their career around. So thank you all. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all again soon.